The Apache girl who died in the desert and awoke next to a rancher. The desert stretched endlessly, a vast sea of sand and rock that glimmered in the hot sunlight. Every step the young Apache girl took felt heavier than the last. Her small frame was thin, her clothes torn from travel and struggle, and her skin burned under the relentless sun. She had been walking for days, though she had lost count. The desert did not care about numbers or time or promises. It only tested those who dared to enter. She had been traveling alone since her family became separated during a long migration. The elders had spoken of safer paths, of towns and rivers where water was abundant, but she had gotten lost when the group scattered during a sudden sandstorm. Now hunger gnawed at her stomach, thirst cracked her lips, and fatigue made every movement a battle. Her small feet were blistered and swollen, but she pressed on, determined to find shelter, water, or even another soul. The wind shifted and blew hot sand into her eyes. She stumbled, wiping her face with her sleeve, and pressed onward. Every shadow became a potential refuge. Every distant rock seemed like it might hide water or safety. But the desert was merciless. It offered no comfort, no kindness, and no mercy for those who were not prepared. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Her breath came in short gasps, and dizziness clouded her thoughts. She sank to her knees and pressed her hands into the sand, feeling the grains burn her skin. For a moment she closed her eyes and wished she could disappear, wished the desert would simply take her and end the pain. She had always been strong, always resilient, but this was a test unlike any she had faced before. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes. Time was strange in the desert. The sun burned relentlessly overhead, then began its slow descent toward the horizon. The girl struggled to continue, dragging herself forward inch by inch. She whispered the names of her family members into the wind, hoping anyone would hear. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it was all she had left. By the time the sun began to set, her strength had almost vanished. She could no longer lift her legs to walk properly. Her mind wavered between hope and despair. She remembered the stories her grandmother told her as a child, stories of brave Apache ancestors who survived impossible journeys. She tried to imagine their faces, their strength, and their courage. But even imagining them could not lift the heavy weight of exhaustion pressing on her body. She crawled toward a low rock, hoping it might give her shade for a short rest. The desert floor was uneven, and every movement scraped her knees and hands. She tried to focus on breathing, counting each inhale and exhale, forcing herself not to give up. Her vision blurred and the world tilted around her. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound sharper. She felt a strange pull, as if the desert itself were drawing her in, testing her will to survive. The temperature dropped slightly as the night approached, but the cold was not comforting. It reminded her that life was fragile, that the warmth of the sun had protected her for so long, and now the desert would challenge her even more. She shivered, pulling her thin blanket tighter around herself, and tried to sleep. But the sand was hard and uneven, her body aching from hours of struggle. Sleep came in small, uneasy bursts, filled with dreams of being lost forever, of fading into the sands, unseen and forgotten. In the middle of the night, she woke with a start. Her throat was dry, her mouth a desert of its own. She tried to remember where she had last seen water, but every memory was clouded by the heat and exhaustion. The stars above seemed endless, indifferent to her suffering. She felt utterly alone. Her small voice whispered into the darkness, calling for anyone to find her, but the desert responded with silence. At some point, her body could no longer fight. Her legs gave out completely, and she collapsed into the sand. Her arms stretched forward, touching the warm grains one last time. She felt the world tilt, a strange heaviness filling her chest. For a moment she thought this was the end, that she would never see another sunrise, never hear another voice, never feel another hand to guide her. She closed her eyes, surrendering to the desert, letting it claim her as it had claimed so many others before her. Yet even in that near-death state, a small spark of hope remained inside her. She did not know where it came from, maybe from memories of her family, maybe from the courage instilled in her by her ancestors, but it refused to die. Her body was weak, but her spirit clung stubbornly to life. She drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness, the desert around her a sea of sand and shadow, but her heart still beat. As dawn approached, the first rays of light painted the desert in soft pinks and golds. The world seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. The girl lay motionless, but somewhere deep inside, the spark of life flickered. She had faced the desert and thought it would be her end, but it had not yet claimed her. Life lingered, fragile and quiet, ready for something, or someone to intervene. The desert continued its endless rhythm, the wind shifting and swirling the sand, hiding the girl almost completely from view. From afar, she looked like one more grain in the vastness, unnoticed, unremarked, a lost soul among millions of others who had wandered into its merciless embrace. And then, unknowingly, she was about to be discovered by someone who would change her fate forever. A man riding through the desert at first light, a quiet rancher who traveled these lands daily, would spot the faintest movement in the sand. While others might have passed by, thinking the desert had claimed her, this man would see what others missed. He would see the fragile spark of life in a girl who should have been lost, and his choice to stop would set in motion a story of survival, trust, and hope that neither of them could yet imagine. The girl, exhausted and near death, remained unaware that her journey was far from over. The desert had tested her, pushed her to the edge of life and death, but she still breathed. Each shallow breath was a testament to her strength, her resilience, and her determination to live. Though she could not know it yet, the story of the Apache girl who died in the desert was only beginning, and the dawn would bring with it a new chapter, one filled with uncertainty, discovery, and the chance for a second life. The desert at dawn was calm, yet full of hidden dangers. The sand sparkled faintly in the early light, and the wind carried with it whispers of the night before. The young Apache girl lay almost hidden among the dunes, her body weak and fragile, barely moving. Every breath was a struggle, every heartbeat a battle. She did not know if she would wake again, or if the desert would finally take her as it had taken so many others. Far away, a lone rancher rode along a winding path that led through the heart of the desert. His horse moved steadily, accustomed to long hours in the sun and sand. The rancher was a man of quiet habits. He did not seek attention, nor did he crave adventure. His life was simple, built on routine, hard work, and the care of his land. But even in his quiet life, he had learned to watch closely, to notice what others overlooked. That day, as he guided his horse along the dusty trail, something unusual caught his eye. At first, it was almost imperceptible, a faint motion among the sand, a subtle disturbance that seemed out of place. Many would have ignored it, thinking it was only the wind or perhaps an animal. But the rancher slowed his horse and leaned forward, squinting against the rising sun. He saw a small figure, almost blending into the golden sand, barely moving. Something in him stirred, a quiet sense of urgency that he could not explain. He spurred his horse closer, careful not to startle whatever or whoever was lying there. As he approached, he saw her clearly for the first time. A young Apache girl, thin and covered in sand, her eyes closed, her chest barely rising with each shallow breath. His heart clenched. She looked as though she had been there for hours, perhaps even days. Her skin was sunburned, her hair tangled and dusty. He could tell immediately that she was alive, though barely. Many people might have assumed she was dead and moved on, but something told him she needed help and that he could not ignore her. Gently, he dismounted and walked to her side. He knelt carefully, placing one hand lightly on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, almost whispering, "I've got you." The girl's eyes fluttered open, confusion and fear clouding her gaze. For a moment she could not speak, only stare at him as if seeing a spirit in the desert. The rancher kept his voice calm and steady. He knew that sudden movements or loud words could frighten her further. "You're safe," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you. Come on, let's get you out of here." It took time, but slowly he lifted her onto his horse, supporting her fragile frame. She clung weakly, almost too tired to hold on. Her small hands barely touched his arm as he guided the horse along the trail back toward his ranch. Every step was careful, every movement measured to avoid causing her more pain. The wind blew softly around them, and the early morning sun warmed the cold, tired skin of the girl. Though she could not speak, her eyes followed him constantly, filled with a mix of fear, curiosity, and something deeper, an unspoken understanding that he had become her lifeline. The ride was long, though the rancher moved as quickly as he could without risking her safety. He glanced down at her from time to time. Her lips were dry and cracked, her skin pale from exhaustion, yet her spirit seemed to cling stubbornly to life. He thought of his own family, of his younger siblings, and of the helplessness he would feel if one of them were in her place. That thought made him even more determined to get her to safety. Finally, they arrived at the small ranch house he called home. It was a modest place, built from sun-bleached wood and surrounded by acres of desert land. Inside, it was simple but clean, filled with the quiet comfort of a man who lived alone yet respected the land and its creatures. He guided the girl carefully inside, laying her gently on a blanket near the hearth. The warmth of the house, the quiet crackle of a fire, and the smell of bread he had baked the night before seemed almost magical after the harshness of the desert. For a long time the girl did not speak. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling with wide, frightened eyes. The rancher moved quietly around her, fetching water and food, though he knew she could barely eat. He cleaned the dirt and sand from her clothes and hair, speaking softly all the while. "You're going to be all right," he repeated. "I promise." His words were simple, but there was a sincerity in them that even the girl, weak and fearful, could sense. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, and the girl finally closed her eyes again, this time not from exhaustion but from trust, or at least the beginnings of it. The rancher sat nearby, watching over her. He remembered the stories of Apache people he had heard as a child, their courage, their resilience, and their strong connection to family and land. Though he had never met anyone from her tribe, he felt a deep respect for her strength, even in her weakened state. As evening approached, she stirred again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where am I?" she asked. The rancher smiled gently. "You're safe," he said. "You're at my home. You're going to be okay now." She tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. He helped her gently, supporting her as she leaned against the pillows. Though her movements were slow and shaky, there was a flicker of relief in her eyes. She had survived the desert, and for the first time in days, she did not feel completely alone. The rancher made her a simple meal: water, soft bread, and a little roasted meat. She could eat only a few bites, but the effort mattered. Each small action, each small bite, was a step back toward life. They sat together in silence for a while, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. Trust was forming slowly, silently, between the two of them. The rancher did not press her to speak of her past, and she did not ask questions. For now, survival was enough. Night fell, and the desert outside became dark and quiet. The stars glittered overhead, endless and eternal. The rancher brought her another blanket and helped her settle in for the night. Though she was still afraid, she felt a small comfort in knowing that someone was watching over her, someone who would not abandon her as the desert had threatened to do. The rancher stayed nearby, his presence a quiet promise that she would not face the coming days alone. Over the next few days, the girl began to regain some strength. She moved more freely, spoke a little more, and even smiled faintly at the rancher's small jokes or gentle encouragements. They developed a routine. He brought her food and water, she rested and recovered. Though their worlds were very different, a quiet bond was forming. The desert had tried to break her, but together, they began to rebuild what had been lost. The rancher learned a little about her story bit by bit. She had been separated from her family, traveling alone, and had faced countless dangers in the desert. He listened without judgment, only offering support and understanding. And though she was wary, she began to see him not just as a stranger but as someone who had saved her life. The girl had survived death once, and now, with his help, she would live again. Outside, the desert continued its vast, indifferent expanse. The wind blew across the dunes, and the sun rose and set as it always had. But inside the small ranch house, life persisted. One small girl, rescued from the brink of death, and one quiet rancher, offering help where others would have looked away. Together, they created a fragile safety in the midst of a harsh world. The story of survival had moved from despair to hope, and neither of them yet knew how deeply their lives would be connected in the days and months to come. By the end of the week, the girl could walk short distances, eat meals on her own, and even laugh quietly at something the rancher said. Though she still carried the memory of the desert's cruelty, she had begun to understand the power of kindness and the strength of human connection. The rancher, too, had learned something profound, that life could appear fragile, but even in its weakest moments it could persist with care and attention. The desert had nearly claimed the girl, but fate, or perhaps something gentler, human, and deliberate, had intervened. She had been given a second chance, and it was the rancher who had made that chance possible. The bond between them was unspoken, yet unmistakable. Trust, respect, and gratitude filled the quiet moments between them, forming the foundation for what would become a remarkable story of survival, healing, and hope. The days passed slowly in the small ranch house. The Apache girl, who had survived the desert by a thin thread, was beginning to feel the strength returning to her limbs. She could now walk more steadily, and the ache in her bones had softened. Yet, she remained cautious, wary of the world beyond the walls that sheltered her. The desert had left a mark, not just on her body, but on her mind. Shadows of sandstorms and endless heat still haunted her, and even the slightest wind made her flinch. The rancher watched her closely, understanding that recovery was more than physical. He spoke little, but his actions said more than words ever could. He brought her fresh water each morning, cooked meals for her, and tended to the small wounds that had begun to scab over. He understood that she needed both patience and protection. Trust, he knew, could not be rushed. It had to grow slowly, like a plant nurtured from a seed. One morning, as the first light of dawn painted the sky with soft oranges and pinks, the girl tried to speak. Her voice was trembling, weak from disuse and fear. Where am I?" she whispered, her eyes wide and uncertain. The rancher knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "You are safe," he said softly. "You're at my home. No one can hurt you here." She looked around the small room, taking in the simple wooden walls, the blankets neatly folded on the bed, and the small fire crackling in the hearth. It was nothing like the world she had known before, yet it felt safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small measure of calm. The rancher did not push her to explain her story or speak of her past. He knew that trauma could be heavier than hunger or thirst. For now, silence and safety were enough. The girl's recovery was slow but steady. Each day, she learned a little more about the small routines of ranch life. She helped with simple tasks, like fetching water from the well or carrying firewood. She was clumsy at first, her movements unsure and tentative, but the rancher guided her patiently. "Careful," he would say with a quiet smile. "One step at a time, you'll get there." And slowly she did. As the days turned into weeks, the girl began to speak more, though always cautiously. She told small pieces of her story, fragments of the journey that had nearly ended in the desert. She spoke of her family, lost to the winds and sand, and of the fear that had settled over her like a heavy blanket. The rancher listened with quiet attention, never interrupting, never judging. He had learned that listening could be more powerful than speaking, that understanding could grow in silence. Trust began to take root between them, delicate but strong. The girl noticed the way the rancher moved around the house, how he tended to every corner with care, how he treated even the smallest animals with respect. There was a kindness in him that she had not expected, a steady presence that made her feel safe. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered against the walls and the fire crackled softly, she began to believe that perhaps life could still be gentle, even after the desert had tried to claim her. One afternoon, while the sun hung high in the sky, the rancher led her outside. The world beyond the house was vast and open, yet familiar in its harsh beauty. Sand stretched in golden waves, dotted with hardy shrubs and rocks. The girl hesitated at the doorway, her feet rooted to the ground. Fear clutched at her chest, memories of the desert threatening to overwhelm her. The rancher knelt beside her. "I'll be right here," he said softly. "Nothing will hurt you. We'll take it slow." Together they walked across the dry ground. At first, she clung to his hand, her small fingers tight around his. Step by step, she learned to trust her body again, to feel the solid earth beneath her feet without fear. The wind blew gently, ruffling her hair, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Small, fragile hope, but real nonetheless. As she regained her strength, the rancher began to teach her about the land. He showed her where water might be found, which plants could be used for food, and how to move quietly and safely through the desert if she ever had to travel again. She listened attentively, absorbing every word, every gesture. Though she had survived the desert once, she now learned the wisdom that could help her survive 1,000 more. At night, they would sit by the fire, the shadows dancing on the walls as they shared quiet moments together. The girl began to talk more freely, asking questions about the rancher's life, about the animals, and about the land that stretched endlessly around them. The rancher answered patiently, sharing stories of the desert, of his family long gone, and of the simple joys of life he had discovered. She listened, sometimes smiling faintly, sometimes laughing softly at his quiet humor. It was during one of these nights that the girl first spoke of her fear. "I thought I would never wake again," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The rancher nodded, understanding her pain more than she could know. "The desert is harsh," he said quietly. "But you survived. You are stronger than you know." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for saving her life, but for being patient, for understanding, for giving her space to heal. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The girl's body grew stronger, her steps steadier, her laughter more frequent. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, when to feed the animals, when to gather firewood, and when to rest. She discovered the joy of simple tasks, the satisfaction of work done well, and the comfort of a life lived with purpose. The rancher, too, noticed changes. She was no longer the frightened, fragile girl who had stumbled into his life. She was becoming confident, aware, and strong once more. Yet, even as she healed, she remained cautious. Memories of the desert were never far away. The sound of wind in the sand, the sharp sting of heat, the endless expanse of nothingness, all haunted her in quiet moments. The rancher understood this and never pressed her to forget. "The past is part of who you are," he told her one evening. "It shaped you, but it doesn't have to define you." She nodded slowly, beginning to see that he was right. She could carry her past without letting it control her future. Their bond deepened in subtle ways. She noticed the small gestures, the way he left a fresh blanket by her bed, the way he tended to the fire without being asked, the quiet attentiveness that made her feel safe. He, in turn, noticed her growing confidence, the way she moved with purpose, and the quiet determination that reminded him of her strength. Words were not always necessary. Sometimes a shared glance, a gentle smile, or the act of simply being present was enough to build trust and understanding. One evening, as the sky turned shades of orange and purple, the girl spoke about her family. Her voice trembled, but she spoke anyway. I don't know if they are alive," she said softly. The rancher placed a comforting hand on hers. "You may never know," he said gently, "but you have life now, and you have the chance to build something new." She nodded, understanding the truth in his words. Though she had lost much, she still had the power to choose her path, to create safety and belonging where there had once been fear and loss. By now, the rancher and the girl had settled into a quiet routine. They shared meals, tended the land, and spent evenings in conversation or in comfortable silence. The girl's laughter became more frequent, her steps more certain, and her eyes brighter. Though the desert had tried to take her, she was alive, and she was learning to live again. The small ranch house, once merely a shelter, had become a place of healing, growth, and quiet wonder. It was here, in this simple home, that the girl began to understand the power of kindness, the strength of patience, and the value of trust. The rancher had given her more than life. He had given her hope, and that hope became a light in the darkness that the desert had left behind. As the stars appeared overhead, scattered across the night sky like diamonds, the girl sat quietly by the fire. She thought of the desert, of the harsh sun and endless sand, and of the nights she had feared would be her last. And she thought of the rancher, the man who had saved her life without asking for anything in return. In that moment, she realized something profound. She had awakened not just to life, but to the possibility of connection, trust, and even happiness. The journey was far from over, but the girl had taken her first steps into a new world, a world where survival was no longer enough, where she could begin to heal, and where the bond she had formed with the rancher would guide her through the challenges to come. The desert had not won. Life had returned, fragile yet powerful, and the story of the Apache girl who had nearly died was only beginning to unfold. The days grew longer, and the seasons began their slow change in the desert. The young Apache girl had settled into a rhythm of life at the ranch, learning not only to survive but to thrive. Each sunrise brought small tasks, feeding the animals, collecting water, mending clothes, and helping in the garden. Though simple, these tasks carried a sense of purpose she had not known in months, perhaps even years. The desert had taught her the meaning of endurance, but the ranch taught her the meaning of routine, of order, and of quiet joy. The rancher watched her with a careful, steady eye. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing moved him as much as the transformation of this fragile girl into someone strong and capable. Her movements were more confident now, her gaze steady and thoughtful. She still carried the memory of the desert, but it no longer ruled her life. Slowly, she began to understand the depth of her own strength, the power that had kept her alive, even when hope seemed lost. One morning, as they worked together in the small garden, the girl paused to look up at the sky. "I never knew it could feel like this," she said softly. "Peaceful." The rancher glanced at her, noting the small smile on her face. "The desert can be harsh," he replied, "but life can still be gentle. Sometimes you just have to notice it." She nodded, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had survived the harshest trials imaginable, yet here, in this quiet place, she was learning the simplest lessons: patience, care, and trust. Word of the girl's presence at the ranch soon reached the nearby town. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some openly hostile. Whispers spread quickly through the streets and markets. An Apache girl living with the rancher. Why? And does he think he can protect her? The girl heard the rumors from a distance, though the rancher shielded her from the worst of it. Still, she felt the tension in the air, a reminder that the world outside the ranch was not always kind. Despite the unease, the girl continued to grow stronger. She learned to ride horses more confidently, to care for livestock, and to navigate the land around the ranch. She discovered that her small hands, once weak and trembling, could now carry heavy buckets of water and tie knots that held fast. The rancher encouraged her efforts, offering gentle corrections and quiet praise. "You're learning fast," he said one day. "I'm proud of you." Those words, simple as they were, filled her with a sense of belonging she had not felt in a long time. The bond between the rancher and the girl deepened in ways that went beyond words. They communicated in glances, in small gestures, and in shared silences. He had saved her life, yes, but more than that, he had offered her stability, respect, and kindness. And she, in return, showed resilience, courage, and an openness that surprised even herself. Together, they formed a quiet partnership, one built on trust and understanding, growing stronger with each passing day. Yet life at the ranch was not without challenges. The town's whispers sometimes turned into overt hostility. Travelers passing by would stare, make rude comments, or ask questions meant to unsettle the girl. She had never experienced such attention, and it unsettled her at first. The rancher, noticing her discomfort, took precautions. "Ignore them," he said firmly. "Their words don't matter here. Only what we do matters." She learned to heed his advice, drawing strength from his presence, yet she could not entirely forget the world outside the ranch's walls. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting golden light across the land, the girl and the rancher worked together to repair a fence damaged in a recent storm. The physical labor was hard, but they worked side by side, laughing quietly at small mistakes and enjoying the rhythm of shared effort. In those moments, the girl felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the rancher, and to her own growing strength. The desert had tested her body and spirit, but here, she discovered the joy of creating and caring, of making life better rather than merely surviving. She began to explore more of the world around the ranch. Each day she ventured a little further, learning the paths, the hidden streams, and the places where wild animals roamed. She marveled at the beauty that had always been there, unseen in the harsh glare of survival. Flowers bloomed in small patches, insects hummed in the heat, and the wind carried scents she had not noticed before. The rancher accompanied her when he could, teaching her to respect the land while appreciating its gifts. At night, the girl often sat by the fire, reflecting on her journey. She thought of her family, of the desert, and of the moments she had feared would be her last. Yet she also thought of the rancher, the life they were building together, and the small victories of each day. In these quiet moments, she realized that survival was no longer her only goal. She had begun to understand what it meant to live fully, to care for herself and others, and to embrace the possibilities that life offered. As time went on, the girl began to form small friendships with animals on the ranch. A young calf followed her everywhere, a small goat nuzzled her hand, and a flock of chickens accepted her presence without fear. These bonds, though simple, brought her immense comfort. She realized that care and patience could transform fear into trust, and that life, when nurtured, could flourish even in harsh conditions. The rancher, observing her growing confidence, felt a quiet pride. He had seen her at her weakest, barely clinging to life, and now watched her flourish in ways he had not expected. Yet he also knew the world outside the ranch would continue to challenge them. Prejudice, fear, and misunderstanding could arrive at any moment. He had to prepare both himself and the girl for the reality beyond their small haven. One day, a traveler passed near the ranch and paused, staring at the girl as she worked. "An Apache girl here," he said loudly, his tone questioning and skeptical. The girl froze, unsure of how to respond. The rancher stepped forward, placing a protective hand near her shoulder. "She's welcome here," he said firmly. "This is her home and she's under my care." The traveler muttered something under his breath and rode away, but the moment left a mark. The girl realized that while the ranch offered safety, the world beyond could still be harsh. Determined not to let fear control her, the girl focused on her growth. She practiced her skills, learned more about the land, and strengthened her body for any challenges that might come. The rancher encouraged her every step of the way, teaching her not only practical skills but also the importance of resilience, patience, and calm courage. "Strength isn't just about muscle," he told her one day. "It's about heart and mind, too." She took those words to heart, feeling their truth in each effort she made. The bond between the girl and the rancher deepened into a quiet companionship built on trust, respect, and mutual care. She trusted him to protect her and guide her, and he trusted her to learn, grow, and face challenges with courage. Together, they navigated the small victories and setbacks of each day, building a life rooted in hope and resilience. Yet despite their peace, the girl could not forget the past entirely. Memories of the desert haunted her dreams. The sun that burned her skin, the thirst that parched her throat, the endless sand that seemed to stretch forever. These memories were painful, yet they reminded her of the strength she possessed and the value of the sanctuary she now had. The rancher helped her carry these memories, offering a presence that made her feel safe even in her moments of fear. As the seasons changed, the girl grew stronger in both body and spirit. She learned to ride the horses with confidence, care for the livestock with skill, and navigate the land with awareness. She even began to teach herself small lessons about reading and writing, guided by the rancher's encouragement. With each passing day, the desert's hold over her faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of life at the ranch and the quiet strength of the bond they shared. By the end of this period, the girl had transformed. She was no longer the frightened, fragile child who had stumbled into the rancher's life. She was resilient, capable, and growing into someone who could face the world with quiet courage. The rancher looked upon her with admiration, knowing that life had tested her and that she had risen stronger than anyone could have expected. And though challenges from the outside world remained, together they had built a sanctuary, a place of healing, growth, and hope, where survival had become only the first step toward a new life. The seasons continued to change, and with them came new challenges and new joys. The young Apache girl, once fragile and near death, had become strong, confident, and resilient. Her days were full of purpose. She cared for the animals, tended the garden, and helped maintain the ranch. Each task she performed brought her a sense of accomplishment and independence. She had survived the desert once, and now she was thriving in a place that had become her home. The bond between her and the rancher had grown deeper than words could express. They had been through so much together, from the moment he found her near death in the desert to the long days of healing and learning to trust again. She had come to rely on him, not only for safety but for guidance, friendship, and companionship. He, in turn, had come to respect her courage, intelligence, and determination. The quiet moments they shared, the long rides across the land, the evenings by the fire, the simple conversations, had forged a connection stronger than either of them could have imagined. One afternoon, as the sun shone brightly over the desert, the girl walked toward the edge of the ranch, taking in the land that stretched endlessly before her. She paused to watch the horizon, where the colors of the sky blended softly into the sand. Memories of the desert flashed in her mind, the fear, the thirst, the endless struggle to survive, but they no longer held her in their grip. She had faced death and returned stronger. She had been given a second chance at life, and she intended to live it fully. The rancher joined her, riding slowly on his horse. He noticed the thoughtful look on her face and understood what she was feeling. "You've come a long way," he said quietly. "You're not the same girl I found in the desert. You're stronger, braver, and wiser now." She smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and determination. "I couldn't have done it without you," she admitted. "You saved my life and you gave me hope." The rancher shook his head gently. "You saved yourself," he said. "I only helped you see that life was still possible." Word of her survival and recovery had begun to spread beyond the ranch. Those who had once questioned her presence now looked on with respect, even admiration. Some came to the ranch to learn her story, curious about how she had survived the harsh desert and what had allowed her to thrive afterward. She told her story carefully, emphasizing the lessons she had learned about resilience, trust, and the kindness of those who had helped her along the way. Each telling reinforced the sense of purpose she had found in sharing her experience, helping others understand that survival was not only about endurance, but also about hope, compassion, and courage. Despite the attention from outsiders, the girl remained grounded in the life she had built with the rancher. Together, they worked to protect the land and care for the animals, finding satisfaction in the simplicity and reliability of daily life. She began to teach herself new skills, guided by the rancher's patience and encouragement. She learned to read and write more fluently, studied the patterns of the desert animals, and discovered ways to make the ranch more self-sufficient. Her confidence grew with each accomplishment, and the rancher watched proudly as she blossomed into a capable, independent young woman. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the girl and the rancher sat together outside, watching the land they had nurtured. She turned to him, her voice soft but steady. "I feel alive now," she said. "Not just alive, but part of something, part of this world again." The rancher nodded, his own eyes reflecting quiet emotion. "You are alive," he said. "And you've made this place stronger just by being here." She smiled, feeling a deep sense of belonging for the first time in her life. Their partnership had grown beyond simple companionship. They relied on each other, supported each other, and protected each other. She had learned to trust him completely, and he had learned to respect her independence and judgment. Together, they were more than a guardian and a survivor. They were a team, bound by shared experience, mutual care, and quiet love. Though neither of them spoke the word aloud, it was clear that their lives were intertwined in a way that would endure long into the future. The desert, once a place of fear and near death, had become a backdrop for their triumph. The harsh lessons she had learned there, patience, endurance, and courage, had shaped her into someone who could face any challenge. And the ranch, once merely a safe haven, had become a place of growth, learning, and opportunity. She had transformed from a frightened child into a strong, capable young woman who could navigate the world with confidence and grace. Over time, the girl began to contribute to the ranch in ways that went beyond physical labor. She organized tasks, helped plan for future seasons, and even began teaching local children about the land and survival skills. Her knowledge, gained through experience and guided by the rancher's wisdom, became valuable to the community. She realized that her survival was not only about herself, it was about using what she had learned to make a difference in the lives of others. The rancher watched her growth with pride. He had saved her life once, but she had saved herself countless times since then. Her courage, resilience, and intelligence inspired him daily. He saw in her not just the girl who had nearly died in the desert, but a remarkable young woman who had transformed tragedy into strength and fear into wisdom. And in that transformation, he found his own life enriched, filled with meaning, connection, and purpose. Challenges continued to arise as they always would. Occasionally, townspeople would question her presence, misunderstand her intentions, or express prejudice. But the girl faced these challenges with a quiet confidence she had never known before. She responded with calm words, steady actions, and the knowledge that she was not alone. The rancher stood by her side, offering support and guidance, but she had learned to trust herself, and that trust became a shield against doubt, fear, and hostility. One winter morning, as frost glistened on the edges of the ranch, the girl looked out across the land she had come to love. The wind was sharp, but it no longer frightened her. She had faced the harshest elements of the desert and survived. She had learned patience, courage, and the importance of trust. And most importantly, she had discovered that life, even after near death, could be full of possibility, joy, and connection. She turned to the rancher, her eyes bright and determined. "I feel like I belong here," she said. He smiled, understanding the depth of what she meant. "You do," he replied. "This place is as much yours as it is mine." In that moment, she understood the true meaning of home, a place of safety, respect, growth, and love. She had survived the desert, but she had found far more than life. She had found belonging. Over the following months, their bond continued to grow. They shared quiet moments of laughter, worked together to care for the land, and faced challenges with determination and courage. The girl's confidence continued to increase, and she began to envision a future filled with possibilities. She had survived the desert, but now she thrived in the world she had built with the rancher. The story of the Apache girl who had died in the desert and awakened next to a rancher became known among those who passed near the ranch. It was a story of survival, courage, and the power of human kindness. People admired her strength, the rancher's compassion, and the quiet life they had built together. Yet the girl never sought recognition. She cared only for the life she was building, the work she was doing, and the bond she shared with the rancher. As the years passed, the girl became an integral part of the ranch. She learned to manage livestock, care for the land, and navigate the challenges that came with living in such a harsh environment. She also became a teacher, passing on the lessons of survival, resilience, and trust to others. She understood that her journey, one that had begun in fear, isolation, and near death, had given her the wisdom and strength to help others navigate their own struggles. The rancher, too, found fulfillment in the life they shared. Saving her had been a profound act, but watching her grow, thrive, and embrace life had been even more rewarding. He realized that life was not only about survival, but also about connection, care, and the quiet joy of seeing someone blossom into their true potential. Together, they had created a sanctuary, not just for themselves, but for the lessons, love, and hope they would carry forward. In the quiet evenings, they often sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. She would speak of the desert, of the hardships she had faced, and of the fear she had once felt. He would speak of the land, of the work they had done, and of the quiet strength she had revealed in facing her past. And in those moments, they both understood that what had begun as a story of survival had become a story of life, growth, and enduring connection. The girl realized that she had not only survived, but had also been transformed. She had faced death, endured pain, and learned to trust again. She had found a home, a mentor, and a companion in the rancher. And most importantly, she had discovered her own strength, courage, and ability to shape her own life. The desert had been cruel, but it had also shown her what she was capable of surviving and thriving beyond. And so, the girl who had nearly died in the desert now lived fully, surrounded by the land, the animals, and the quiet companionship of the man who had saved her. Life had given her a second chance, and she embraced it with courage, gratitude, and joy. The story of the Apache girl who awakened next to a rancher was one of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of human kindness. A story that would be remembered in the hearts of those who knew her, and in the quiet strength she carried forward into every new day.